yesterday had a huge case where they heard oral arguments dealing with the issue of gerrymandering. They're considering a case out of Wisconsin where Republicans there pretty much have a lock on the state legislature because of how they have drawn the districts to create these supermajorities, having far more Republican-controlled districts than Democratic districts. The Supreme Court, depending upon how they rule, this could literally change politics all across this country. It could either lead to a redrawing of many districts from Texas to Alabama to Florida, or it could even make it worse. In the arguments before the court, of course, the plaintiffs say this violates the Constitution, while lawyers defending the Wisconsin map gave Republicans many more seats in the state assembly, argued their case before the Supreme Court, saying, no, this is all okay. Justice Anthony Kennedy grilled the attorneys, asking a number of questions. He is considered the most important vote on the Supreme Court because in a prior case, he ruled that even though he ruled with them in the prior case, he said there could come a day when they determine that changes can be made, a formula can be devised to ensure you don't have this actually taking place. Let's break this thing down with Kristen Clark. She's Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law. Before we do that, Arnold Schwarzenegger, do we have that soundbite, folks? When Schwarzenegger was outside the Supreme Court yesterday, this is what he had to say. He is against political gerrymandering, and he was in the Supreme Court yesterday.
Republican issue, and it is not a Democratic issue. Both parties do the same thing. In some states, it's the Republicans that do it, the gerrymandering, and in some states, it's the Democrats that do it. This kind of terrible gerrymandering that is really a fixed system where the politicians choose the voters rather than the voters choosing the politicians.
Kristen, when you listen to these arguments, when you listen, first of all, it's pretty clear where Gorsuch is going to rule, where he tried to give the other. First of all, he's the newest member of the Supreme Court. Okay, when you're brand new, you might not want to lecture the other Supreme Court justices by trying to say, oh, the Supreme Court has never made political rulings when it comes to voting, and Ginsburg had to say, you ever heard of one person, one vote?
Right. It was great being in the court yesterday for the second day of this Supreme Court's term. This is by far one of the most important cases that the Supreme Court will decide this term. The debate was very spirited between the justices, and it's clear that Justice Kennedy's vote will matter and be critical in this case. And he's someone who's very concerned about this crisis of partisan gerrymandering. Partisan gerrymandering is when lawmakers basically rig the system. They manipulate district lines for their own political benefit. And this is a widespread problem across the country, and the Supreme Court really is the kind of place of last resort to fix this problem. What we need is for the Supreme Court to announce a rule that makes clear when lawmakers engage in extreme and unconstitutional partisan gerrymandering. Wisconsin provides an example of this. In 2012, Republicans picked up about 48% of the vote share, yet somehow they rigged the line so that they secured 60 of 99 seats in the state assembly. And what we've seen across the country in places like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Georgia, some of the places with the most gerrymandered districts, is that politics is very ugly, very, very polarizing. These are the places where we see states taking really aggressive action to turn the clock back. We see them turning the clock back on civil rights, on union issues, on criminal justice issues. So it's a bad thing for our democracy.
Spencer, you've written a book dealing with the issue of voter suppression, and when we talk about what's going on here, this is all by design to literally ensure total control over decades.
Right. Decades of a party controlling or incumbents controlling political power. The court is basically saying, hey, we're above this. We don't get into politics. We're about law. The problem with that argument, though, is the court didn't make that argument when it went in and said corporations can spend an unlimited amount of money on politics. It got into politics then. When it rolls back black districts by saying, hey, you're considering race too much, the court is getting into politics here. So the court can devise some neutral standards that are workable in this situation.
The court makes rulings, Greg, on political decisions. That's why they're there.
Marbury versus Madison. I think what John Roberts is saying yesterday, basically trying to maintain the authority of the court, is really something we have to examine in the context of enforceability. Because what you have is states that, like California and others, that have said, we're not going to do it. And now, what Roberts is afraid of, I think, is afraid of the country coming apart. But, Kristen, you know, it's interesting thinking about this because Ginsburg shut Gorsuch down with that question yesterday. How in the world can any justice on the Supreme Court justify the idea that they can't intervene when, in fact, the entire history of American jurisprudence, especially in voting rights law, is about judge-made law? Right. How can they justify that legally? I don't understand as a legal scholar, as a legal professor. I don't understand as scholars and lawyers. How can they make that argument?
It was great to see Justice Ginsburg kind of take control of the argument. And then shortly after that, Justice Sotomayor asked what I think was one of the most powerful questions. What value does partisan gerrymandering have in our democracy? None. And this is not a problem that the Supreme Court should ignore. Justice Roberts expressed concern about the floodgates of litigation opening, but they already have, because right now there's no clarity across the country, and we see lawmakers engaging in this nefarious practice, rigging the rules for their own political benefit. But I want to make sure we put some historical context on this. We saw this problem rise to a crisis level in 2010. 2008, Barack Obama wins the presidency, and it results in this backlash across the country. We see Republicans rising up, taking over state legislatures in more than 30 states across the country, taking over governorships. And that's the moment where we saw partisan gerrymandering really taking root during the 2010 redistricting cycle. It's critical that the Supreme Court step in and provide clarity now, because we're right on the heels of 2020, the 2020 round of redistricting. And it's very much a civil rights issue, because lawmakers will harm minority voters, the interest of minority voters, and claim, no, it's not for racial reasons, it's for partisan reasons. So we need the court to come in and say, you know what, you crossed the line when you do X, it's unconstitutional when you do X. We need that clarity.
Real quick. And it's difficult to have unilateral disarmament here. It's difficult to say, California, you've got to be neutral in terms of your districting, but Texas and all these Republicans, you guys go and gerrymander as much as you want. We really need to deal with this problem across the country. And
of course, Texas also changed the game when they changed, literally when they did gerrymandering and redistricting in the middle of a census. And so normally this is done after the census over a 10-year period. But no, you had, of course, why his name is escaping me, he was the exterminator. Tom DeLay. When they saw the numbers, they literally went in, and then what they also tried to pimp black folks. And Ron Wilson, who got thrown out of office, the state representative, he should have got thrown out of office. They created one black district in Houston to wipe out multiple white Democrats in the area. And Wilson ran for the seat, got destroyed, which is the seat held by Congressman Al Green. But that's what they've also done. They tried to play black folks and Hispanics by saying, well, we'll create one more black or Hispanic district. So even in Texas, where they got 5 new seats, the Republicans there made 4. It was because of the population shift of Latinos. 5 new seats. They made 4 Republican districts and created 1 for Latinos, but actually it wasn't for Latino, for an African American, because Latinos even lost even the one they created. Those are the games that are being played there. So we'll certainly keep following this case. Christian, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no.
That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.